Well, if you've watched our series on hostas on our YouTube channel, you'll know I'm very keen on growing hostas in pots. I find it's one of the easiest and best ways to grow them really well. And at this time of year, they really are starting to come up and give some architectural structure already. Just look at the growth we've got on this little beauty. Not so little, having said that, it really is starting to fill this pot quite nicely. And now, if you're going to divide your hostas, is a really good time to do so. The other job I've got on here is just picking over the top of the compost on these and cleaning them up. You'll see we've got some seedlings coming up in this pot here. They have been top dressed, which I did towards the end of last season with some mushroom compost, but it's obviously still got some seed in it, or some growth from the compost, which is just an inch or so below this surface. If your pots are very full, as this one you can see here is, sometimes it's best just to scrape, if you can, away very gently from the surface to remove some of the compost before putting the fresh compost on. But be very careful, because the roots of hostas, when they're in pots, can you see that? These fibrous little threads are actually the roots. They tend to fill the pots very intensely, and the roots are very close to the surface, so you certainly don't want to go down too far, particularly if they're in the dormant stages of growth. Just be very careful if you're going to have to remove any compost. Best, I think, if you've got a full big clump like this, to consider splitting this into 3, perhaps even 4 young plants and potting them into fresh pots. Because the other problem we get, as you can see here, gradually, no matter what you spend on terracotta these days, it doesn't seem to last more than a couple of seasons. Even the stuff that's sold as frost resistant is certainly not frost proof. And some of these pots we've had for years and years and years, but they just don't make them like this old thing anymore. That's probably 70 or 80 years old. This has got, actually in here, you can just see a seeded forget-me-not, which I'm going to take out. It's very tricky to do one-handed while you're filming. Making a pig's ear of this, but there we go. And underneath you can just see these little shoots coming through from this tiny little hosta that we are growing here. It's a really tiny little thing, flowers every year, but you can see it's spread out and it's filled all around the boundary of this one. So again, another opportunity to lift and divide. We grow a whole selection of different varieties, and I've enjoyed collecting them over the last few years. As I see them, if there's something different, I tend to be attracted towards them. They flower beautifully, particularly this little one, which is one we've grown in the garden for years. I wish I could tell you the specific genus or name of the variety, but I've lost the label years ago. It was just one we found probably in this garden and was here for many years. We've divided it multiple times, and it's one of the best flowering varieties in pots in terms of the volume of flower it produces. Now, this very large pot, it's probably around a 14-inch diameter rim, contained one of my favourite and original hostas that's been grown in this pot now for approaching 8 or 9 years. It's one of the large leaf varieties. It's quite late to come out, as you can see, but as it unfurls, just look at the beauty that you can appreciate on the underside of these leaves. They really do come out, and they are quite spectacular even in the bud form. So by cleaning up the surface of these pots, you really can show them at their best even at this early stage in the season. There we go, another clump of my favourite flowering one. These were actually only divided, I think, at the beginning of last season and grown on into these pots. This will probably, you can see it's not spread out. We've got about 3 inches around the circumference just on that aspect. Is it actually filling close to the edge of the pot? But this should continue to grow quite well in here for another 2 or 3 years before it needs repotting. And here's the final clump I'm going to show you again. Same variety, split at the same time, almost at the same stage of growth, but on the north face of the barn here. Just look at the damage that this pot's taken. This is a relatively new pot. It's almost disintegrating around the rim. If I move that, I think I'm going to end up having to repot it into some fresh terracotta, which is a real shame because it would otherwise have kept in here for another year and a half, maybe even 2 years. One final thing, advice-wise for you, at this time of year, it's very easy to have been out of the habit of watering these type of pots over the winter period, but now we're starting into almost May. It's very easy for these to dry out quite quickly, so do start watering and just keep an eye on the compost composition to make sure that these don't dry out, because nothing will do them more harm and damage your display later in the year than them running into a drought when they're in full growth and expanding so quickly at this time of year.